for joining us, and welcome everybody for coming to our bi-weekly women webinars, where we connect, we share, we learn what's really important, especially in the midst of these very challenging times that are challenging in practically every aspect. But the good thing about this is a unique opportunity to really go deep and reimagine where we're going, who are we? And this is exactly what we're going to be talking today. For the next 50 minutes, the title of this call is It Safe to Be Me, My Authentic Me? And our amazing speaker today, Gulnar Vaswani, a really great friend. She's the founder and chief cultural officer of Leadership Reimagine. So for more than 20 years, she's been incredibly talented strategist, board advisor, and executive coach to CEOs. And Gulnar is very passionate about something that is fundamental today, that is helping leaders to understand and embrace inclusivity, cross-cultural dynamics, and diversity. She's an amazing inspirator to gain self-awareness and actively embrace change and recognize and harness differences. So this is fundamental. You will be, so let me just give a few more things about Be Women. And I'm Laura Jadrukoch, founder of Be Women, lawyer in the state of New York and Argentina, and passionate about using business and the markets as a force for good. So Be Women, we are a global network of women entrepreneur and intrapreneur that seek to balance purpose and profits in the markets towards a caring economy. So yes, you heard me right. Caring economy is a system that genuinely cares for the well-being of people and fulfillment of people and respect and responsibility for our environment. We, as a network, create awareness and inspire specific measurable actions regarding our two burning issues of our society, that are gender inequality and climate change. So we collaborate in our network with thousands of women and men towards leaving behind the traditional economies of winners and losers and moving towards a long-term vision and values of creating a caring economy. One more few seconds more before I give the word to Gulnar is Be Women Empowering Move. That is very important. I want you to all be very energized, because whatever you hear today will be mind-changing. And it's to put your shoulders back, your chin up, make your eyes twinkle with joy and determination, and with a super wide smile that illuminates everybody around you. Because as you know, smiling is very good for the soul. Gulnar, the line is all yours.
Thank you, Laura. You made me smile. So fantastic introduction. And thank you. You know, without further ado, I'm going to jump into two quotes, which I think will say thank you louder than I can to you, Laura, and to what this work and speaking to groups like yours means to me. So the first one is, the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge, by Stephen Hawking. And so that goes to say, as much as I've been doing this for a while, I'm a student, I'm a lifelong learner, and I have no illusion that I'm here to teach or impart. I'm here to learn from you. So I look forward to all of your questions. The second quote is, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. So I feel very, very blessed and very honored that I feel my work is a gift, and giving it and sharing it with all of you in terms of my story, my narrative, my learnings is really a pleasure. So thank you for having me here. I'm going to speak about psychological safety and why it matters in not only optimizing our potential, but also seeking out our fulfillment and general well-being, and why it matters to us, what gets in the way, first what it is besides just physical safety, how do we overcome the challenges? And I'm going to, of course, leave you with lots of practical tools from the many people I've had the pleasure to work with, coach, interact with, and learn from. So why does inclusion matter to me? For over a decade, I've been working on issues like diversity, equity, inclusion, cross-cultural dynamics, gender, leadership, and I'm very specific about equity, not equality. I think those are two very different words. They have very different emotional associations for me. I find equality is very much a fixed mindset concept, whereas equity really does summarize my approach. It's very much a growth mindset. So why does this matter? What's my personal story with this? So my family and I, we moved to the States when I was 8 years old from India. And at that time, the US, and I know this is a contentious issue right now, but it is my real story. The US, in those immigration forms back in the 70s, they didn't have Asian Americans as a box, right? It was Caucasian, it was Latin American, African American, all other. So overnight, as a young girl, I went from being a very assured and very proud Indian citizen to being an all other in the United States, where my parents, like many immigrants, bought the American dream. And since then, I've moved over 10 times, cities, countries, continents, and in every place I live, I am not represented, at least visibly, in the majority, in the dominant culture. So I think starting with that, being an ethnic minority for most of your life, you're always working twice as hard to fit in, to assimilate, to acclimate, to adjust, to find your tribe, to belong. And now on the gender role, when most girls and my peers were playing with dolls and houses and cooking, I ended up playing with balls and trains and rocket ships. And so even from a gender perspective, there was this sense of, ooh, okay, there are a lot of women around me, a lot of girls around me, but I kind of don't seem to fit that as well. So I think instead of desperately seeking Susan, I think all my life, without knowing it, I've always sought this sense of inclusion, this sense of belonging. So it matters very deeply to me. Today, I'm going to look at a concept of including ourselves, right? Laura, you talk about a caring economy. I talk about self-care and self-compassion and self-advocacy. And really self-love being the pinnacle or the starting point of inclusion. Because I think we're waiting for countries and cities and our organizations, our corporate cultures to become more inclusive. People like me, people like you, Laura, and I'm sure many of the women on this call work towards this movement of inclusion, embedding inclusion in your own way. But when I did the Facebook talk for the women's conference, their theme was on belonging. And that really hit home for me because I heard myself say, rather than wait for the companies and our countries to include us, what about if we start with including ourselves, right? So if we belong to ourselves, that's the start. That's the start of inclusion, and one person at a time. So I'm going to start sharing some slides, and that's the context of our talk today. And of course, it's called, Is It Safe to Be Me? So let me start with the doing, and then I'll move to the being, right? So Google had hired Harvard Business School to study what is the single biggest, most important factor for high-performing teams. They asked Harvard to study 180 of their teams across the world, so this transcends cultural differences. And the results found that the most important aspect of these 180 high-performing team was psychological safety. They found that leaders who knew how to impart safety in their teams, and that was measured by visible behaviors like people who spoke up, presented their views, they were comfortable presenting their views and admitting mistakes. This led to a very equal sense of sharing. Voices on the table were distributed evenly, FaceTime, and of course it led to better innovation and decision making. And from that research, we have a definition, a working definition of psychological safety. So it's a safety is a sense of confidence that a team will not embarrass, reject, punish someone for speaking up. It describes a team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect in which people are comfortable. And here's the punchline: being themselves. Now, of course, we can talk about this in our work environments, or you as leaders. Are you imparting psychological safety in your teams? Are you embedding safety in your corporate cultures, in your company cultures, in your startup cultures? But this also comes back to the home environment. Many of the people I work with, especially women and the ones I coach to help progress them through their pipeline and their talent pipeline, talk about a sense of belonging or not belonging, or safety or not safety, to be themselves from a very young age, right? So this, for those of you who are parents, I'm a parent of 2 grown boys, and I read this research and I had to ask myself, do I make a safe environment for my boys to be exactly who they are? Do I see them for who they are without a need to continuously sort of coach, fix, comment, and want to tweak, or see a part of them that I want to see, right? So now we come to this question of, what about this concept of being ourselves? What does it mean to be ourselves? So we hear some version, doesn't matter which culture or where you were brought up, you've heard some version of know thyself, and you've heard some version of love thy neighbor, right? So let's address, what does it mean to know thyself? Which self? The self that you think you are? The self that others think you are? The self that you aspire to be someday? Or the self that you are today, right? The one that you really are inside. I think a really good story for this is the story of the David by Michelangelo. When Michelangelo was asked, what was the inspiration behind this beautiful piece of art? And how did you come up with something so marvelous and so lifelike? His answer surprised me when I first heard it, and you may have heard this before, and it may surprise you. He actually said, I didn't do anything. The David was always inside the stone. I just took out the bits that don't belong. Now, if you stop and pause for a second there and you ask yourself, if inside each and every one of us is this grand, unique masterpiece, the David, what are the bits on us that we project, that we wear as armor, that we present to the world, that don't belong? Right? So this sent me into a bit of a quest and an internal journey with myself. The research that I really cite often and have used across a lot of my trainings at board level, at senior levels, at emerging talent level, is a piece, very relatively new piece. It's a meta-analysis of what self-awareness is and why it matters. Why is it become the meta skill of leadership in the 21st century? I mean, just about 50 years ago, self-awareness would be more likened to a spiritual concept, right? Know thyself. A lot of our great theologists have talked about self-awareness as a spiritual pursuit, but now we talk about it from a leadership pursuit. So Tasha Eurich actually says, and I'll define it in a minute in the context of her research. It would be interesting to cite that of the 5,000 people that participated in a cross-section of this research, less than 10% were actually self-aware by the definition that Tasha put out. So she actually said self-awareness isn't one truth. It's a delicate balance between 2 distinct, even competing viewpoints. So what are the competing viewpoints? She talks about internal and external, right? So a little bit of the David, the one that you think you are and the one that others think you are. So what does it mean to be in an active pursuit of self-awareness? So I guess this would be the first sort of tool, that self-awareness is something we work at. We actively pursue it. There are ways to build in routines of self-awareness checks in our day. So let's just talk about what she disclosed, or what her research disclosed first. She said leaders who are self-aware tend to be more confident, more creative, clearer thinkers, better decision makers, and of course, better communicators. But I think the trick is to distinguish between this internal and external, which really is, internal is how clearly we see our own values, our passions, our aspirations, our reactions, and the impact we have on others. And external awareness is understanding how others view us. How do you receive feedback from others, especially on how you show up in a room? Research shows that people who know how others see them are more skilled at showing empathy and taking perspective. And we all know how much perspective matters in the world today, in the events today that we see around us. Internal self-awareness is associated with higher job satisfaction and personal and social control. Another interesting outcome of this research is something that I love, because one of my passions is to work with millennials and the next gen of leaders, helping mold and shape the incoming talent to be the leaders of future. Hopefully they'll get it better than we did. That experience and power hinder self-awareness. So you would think, you know, in the old model of leadership, the very pyramid model where it was top down, the older, more senior professionals or executives or authority was given, or power was given to age, to those in a higher authority or higher part of our ladders. But actually, Tasha Erich's research says experience and power can actually hinder self-awareness, because as you climb to the top, less people give you feedback. So the older you are, doesn't mean you're more self-aware. And of course, introspection, which a lot of people think is basically ruminating, right? Beating ourselves up, asking ourselves, why did we do this? What did I do well? What did I say right? What didn't I say right? Doesn't always improve self-awareness. So we'll come back to this towards the end. And when I take questions, if you have questions, I'm happy to send out to Laura the actual piece of research as well to send out to those who are interested. So now let's talk about safety as a human need. What motivates people to do the things they do, or to strive for the goals that they strive for? Well, at least one theory of motivation, a theory that I subscribe to, you might have heard of it, many of you have, Maslowian theory, says that people are motivated to meet their needs first. And once they meet their basic needs and their needs for safety, they will move on to what higher level needs are, which is belonging, love, esteem, self-esteem, and of course, self-actualization, which is the pinnacle of life, many theologists have taught us, right? So self-actualization is fulfilling your potential, finding your purpose, perhaps. But what I see sometimes in that pursuit, many people are looking for permission to find their passion and their pursuit, or what they think is their passion is actually just a distraction. So let's talk about safety as a very basic need. And I'm going beyond physical safety. Of course, physical safety, right now, what we're seeing in the United States, what we see here in Hong Kong, sometimes when you're in the midst of this rageful protests and rioting, your physical safety is hampered. But this is more about the psychological safety of, which is tied to our need for predictability, for certainty, for control. And of course, depending on your personality, some people have more need of control than others. With the COVID crisis, I would say a large part of our globe safety needs has been taken away. And many people, including myself, including everyone I know, has had to deal with their relationship with uncertainty. How well do I navigate in the dark? How well do you navigate in the dark? How do you deal with the unknown? What part of you surfaced? What's the best part of you that surfaced? What's the worst part of you that surfaced during this times of uncertainty? How are you under stress? How are you under crisis? How do you respond to change? So for me, the Maslow's theory of motivation really, really works and really meets or answers a lot of questions, because unless we have these lower level needs, we don't really move on to our higher level needs, or we're actually able to move on, but not fully and not in full flow. So now let's talk about how can we? Everyone's heard about interpersonal skills, but not everyone's heard of intrapersonal skills. And that makes sense, because our whole lives, ever since we were babies, we hear about interacting with people, socializing with people, love thy neighbor, serve the greater good. And I know a lot of the B women, that's what you stand for. That's what that's what our ethos is. And during the COVID crisis, many of us have interpersonally reached out. Even the leadership research says that interpersonal effectiveness is highly associated to success and fulfillment. So it's no doubt that we spend a less percentage of our time building a relationship with ourselves and much more focus on building our relationship with others. And I think this is underemphasized, because if we are going to be able to build and serve the needs of others, we really do have to start looking at what are our needs? What is my relationship with myself? Because all relationships start with our relationships with ourselves. And the modality this plays in is in our self-talk, right? And Henry Ford, I think, well before any of this research came out, I think he has a beautiful way of summarizing intrapersonal relationship with yourself is whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. And no one knows this more than athletes, right? The world of sports teaches us so much about what do we do when things are down? What do we do to be resilient? How do we talk ourselves, walk ourselves, act ourselves out of this sort of tough place? So I think it's really important to bring in a concept of self-efficacy. I guess in everyday language, self-efficacy is confidence, right? But confidence in the social science sense is self-efficacy. And there's some interesting points to talk about self-efficacy. So I'm going to refer to my notes. Self-efficacy is actually more than just a belief. It's the strength of our belief in our ability to meet our goals, right? So this is focused on our doing. This comes down to the Olympic gold versus the Olympic silver winner. Most of the time, the difference is 0.002 millimeters or 0.005 seconds. But the difference, when researched and found, is usually in the belief that this athlete, this player, has in their ability to meet. This enhances their human accomplishment, well-being. That being said, a lack of self-efficacy is also one of the biggest roadblocks for someone's perceived sense of happiness and achievement, right? So people with high capabilities or high self-efficacy approach difficult tasks as a challenge to be mastered rather than a threat to be avoided. These people set challenging goals, and they're deeply and genuinely interested in them. When failure or setback occurs, they recover quickly, so resilience, increase their commitment to the efforts, and if they fail, they accredit their failure to insufficient effort or a gap or a skill that they can fill. In contrast, those with low self-efficacy usually shy away from difficult tasks, and they view this as a personal threat. They have low aspirations often, weak commitment to their goals, and of course, when faced with difficult tasks, focus on their inadequacies. What could I have done better? It's sort of the badgering, right? I should have done this and I should have done that. And all sorts of adverse outcomes that focus on not just overcoming the challenge, but that they are the challenge, right? So giving up easily is also a reflection of low self-efficacy. So now, what are the factors that determine self-efficacy? What does the research tell us? This is something that starts in childhood. and unfortunately kind of just set by adolescence, just like self-esteem. The ratio of success versus failure in your childhood matters. Did you have a healthy ratio of success and failure? So in other words, were you trusted enough to fail? Did you have enough opportunities to get up, dust your knees off, and move forward? Social support and persuasion. I mean, this is the very simple, we are who we hang with. If you hang out and your tribe and your community and your mentors are people with high self-efficacy, this is contagious. It's not just a fancy word for self-esteem, and I'll make the distinction in a minute. So what's the third one? It's a lot harder. Your company matters, your social support matters, and your ratio of success versus failures. It's a lot more difficult to instill high self-efficacy just by your social persuasion. So in other words, a mentor or a coach telling you you can is not the same as you telling yourself you can than it is to destroy someone's self-efficacy. So let me go to self-esteem first, because a lot of people ask when I talk about self-efficacy, is that the same as self-esteem? No, self-esteem is an overall feeling of your self-worth and value. It's focused on your being, whereas self-efficacy is focused on your doing. And the example I often give is, for example, dancing. I love to dance. I have a low self-efficacy. I don't think I'm a really good dancer, but I do love to dance. That doesn't mean I have low self-esteem. So self-efficacy is very situational and context about the task on hand, whereas self-esteem is just your overall self-worth. Self-talk is the medium that we talk about self-efficacy with. What is the part that we can build? What is the part that we can work on? What is the part that we can change or affect change on? It's the internal voices or commentary as you go through events and react to people. And when I talk to, women executives and professionals about this, this seems to be a very common predicament about this unhealthy relationship with our self-talk, with this internal commentary that goes on inside our head. And even if you look at sort of typical coaching, a formula that I like and follow is one presented by Tim Galway, who I think is the father of modern day coaching. He was actually a sports coach, and he talks about the inner game, that everything happens inside us rather than the opponent outside us. The opponent inside us is the obstacles as fear, the self-doubt, the lapses in focus, the limiting beliefs that we hold on to as we walk out on that stage, or as we walk out on that pitch, or as we about to go close our next deal, or as we're about to make a presentation. So the formula that Tim Galway's presented as coaches, and some of you've probably seen this, is performance, and notice the performance is the small p. Right? Because performance is not as relevant. We live in a world where we're always measuring output. But what about potential? What if we found a way to measure potential or assess accurately the potential of a child or of a student or of an intern or of our employees? And then we were able to drive to that potential and train to that potential and develop that potential. So what gets in the way? This I, called interference, right? And the interference is very often, especially in women, our self-talk. So now I get to the so what part of, I'm going to give you a few tools, a few reframes, and I guess then we can open it up to questions and any thoughts or questions that you've had, or if anyone I've lost along the way, I'm happy to backtrack. So I'll just move on with the feeling confident. Now, you've all heard the fake it till you make it. You've all heard the research on that our body language affects our mind. But this is more concrete than that. This is not fake it till you make it. This is actually developing a muscle of confidence. Right? What can we do through our senses? What are little self-care, self-compassion checks that we can do through the day, through our week? Many of you have routines and rituals for self-care already. You can add these to your list. So one of them is just keep a list of your ongoing success. Remember, you are to build a muscle of being your best and most supportive cheerleader, yourself, as well as your most loving critic. So keep an ongoing list of your successes, however small. Connect frequently with your mentors. There is so much research on the power of mentorship, the power of sponsorship. Find them. Find the people who are your cheerleaders, who will cheer you on, who will tell you you can, and hold on to them. Ask for feedback. Ask, what do you see as my strengths? How do you self-affirm those strengths? And identify your own quick wins. And of course, upskill when needed. To see yourself accurately, that self-awareness piece, right? How others see you versus how you see yourself. You might have a skill gap that you will need to fill. And that's definitely part of it. So being accurate in your assessment of potential and asking others for that feedback is crucial. Feedback is such an essential part of leadership. The most effective leaders are continuously seeking feedback and always view feedback as a gift. There's no such thing as bad feedback. But many times when we're giving ourselves feedback, we kind of start with the badgering first, right? What did we do wrong? What can I do better next time? How can I fix it? What was my mindset? What was I thinking? So I would suggest that to do a balanced feedback and to leverage the power of positive over negative is to always ask yourself, well, what's working well? What am I really proud of? What did I do well? And even when you ask feedback from others, ask, what did I do well? What did you like? What's working? And then the second part of that feedback stem is what can I do differently? Not better, differently. What have I learned? Because this is really the inner game. If every mistake and every failure is an opportunity to learn, and if every knowledge and insight I have about what I don't like gives me an indicator of what I do like, or if I can play to my strengths and build on my strengths versus always try to upskill and fill in for my weaknesses, then I have a further starting point. A lot of people forget to periodically check in on what's on their plate, right? So our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, and if you're like my age group, you're approaching your 50s, 60s. What are you juggling now? What can you let go of now? Who can you delegate to now? A large mistake we make is holding on to a concept of us when we were in college or grad school, or not upgrading and not updating our own vision and our own goals and our own missions through the different phases and stages of life. And we know that through phases and stages, our needs shift. And as we said, if our needs shift, our priorities shift, our behavior shift, our goalpost will shift. So what's on your plate is a really simple but incredibly powerful exercise to really map it out. When I do this with women leaders, they're amazed at what they put down on paper as how much they're really juggling and how unfeasible sometimes that is, and how we set ourselves for failure and not success. So this is one of my favorites, energy, not time. Let me skip for one slide. This is a reframe. I'll come back to how to fill our energy. Managing our time is how we grew up learning, right? The alarm clock and the meetings and punctuality being a sign of virtue and incredibly professional. People are always punctual. I'm not saying not to be punctual. What I'm suggesting or inviting you to do is to ask yourself in your day, what gives you energy? Who gives you energy? What part of your day, what tasks of your work give you energy? What drains your energy? Who drains your energy? So to be mindful and aware of your energy. And our energy is something that, we can go off on many tangents here, but really it's, are you feeling full of energy and excited? Now, this is very different than being tired. Now, those of you who know what I'm talking about know that you could have 12, 15-hour days, but if you love what you're doing, and it's something that gives you that energy, that passion, that zeal, you're not low on energy. You might be fatigued in your body, but you're not low on energy. So it's a very big difference between low on energy and being tired. So time is finite. We are limited, no matter if you're a man, a woman, a child, we all have 24 hours in a day. We're not getting any more. What we do with it, where we spend our time, shows us what matters. It's an indicator of our priorities. But if we look at filling our tank as an ongoing ritual, as an ongoing self-compassion check, what do you love doing? What did you do once upon a time that perhaps you've stopped doing? How important is it to you? How much of it are you doing? Even if you can fill in 15 minutes a day of putting yourself in that mindset, your mind, your energy, your resonance vibrates at a higher level. What's stopping you? What's getting in the way? And of course, what can enable you? Who can you enlist? Who can you empower? Who can you delegate? Who can you enlist and invite to help you fill your energy tank? So let's go to the other reframes now. For the constant to-do list people, and I used to be one of them. I grew up with that very consultant MBA, 5-year plan, 8-year plan. And guess what? My 5-year plan, 8-year plans, I got there, but not maybe in the 5 or 10 years or the 8 years that I planned to get there. And it maybe had a different shape, and it maybe had a different look, and it was definitely in different continents. So I've kind of turned away from the to-do list obsession, and I've moved into an I did list, right? So I spend most of my evenings reflecting and jotting down a few things. I'm not a big journaler, but at night before I sleep, I like to ask myself, what did I learn today? Did I learn something new? And what did I do today? Right? What did I do today? What did I accomplish? And it could be a simple thing as seeing a friend who brought me great joy. It could be a simple thing as reading an article. It could be an incredibly powerful thing as closing a deal, landing a new contract. It could be a wonderful thing like I had a really special heart-to-heart conversation with my son today. Right? So I count all the things that I actually did versus going to bed at night going, oh my God, tomorrow I have to do this and I have to do this and I forgot to do this and I didn't do this and I didn't do. And every morning that wakes me up in a mindset that says, okay, today I'm going to do this. And at night, oh, today I did this. Right? So you're setting yourself up again for that success. You're developing that muscle of confidence, or that self-efficacy. And the last thing that's really worked for me, and this is maybe more in the last few years, is starting to monitor and observe and examine my should list. Now your should list is again, an inner game. I should do this. I should pick up my kids. I should have dinner at home with my spouse. I shouldn't travel for more than 3 nights a week and leave my family. I should go and visit my family or my parents. Whatever your should list is, turn them into wants, or start to face up to some of these boundary settings and healthy boundary settings to make that space for the things that bring you joy, fill your energy tank, right? So just monitor. Some of these shoulds are never going to go away. Some of these shoulds are joys. I mean, there are shoulds, but they're joyful shoulds. And some of them are burdensome shoulds. You know the difference. So I just started to simply monitor and examine, how many times a day do I should myself? How many times do I say yes and mean no? And actually, one of the New Year's resolutions that I started to set for myself is saying, I don't want to have more than 2 handfuls in a year of opportunities and times where I say yes and I mean no. And so far, I'm doing all right with that. Positive emotions. I mean, we all know that self-efficacy itself comes from the positive psychology movement. And we have heard in some form or the other that the brain in positive is far more productive than the brain in negative or neutral. So why is this so shocking to me? Because many parts of Asia Pacific, many educational curriculums, many parenting styles still kind of think of this positive affirmation, positive reinforcement as something only Americans do. And it's not about being American or not American or South American or African, or it's about understanding how the brain works. The brain in positive, when you like something, when you enjoy what you do, when you're happy doing it, you're going to do better at it. And maybe this is newer science, and maybe this is a newer age of thinking, and maybe this causes a divide in our sort of generational diversity, because we've got 4 generations working together. The eldest in our workforce came from a generation of command and control. Our newest entry level into the workplace are coming in from a generation of inspire and influence. But whatever generation you come from, and generational diversity is real. It's real. Every generation has its own culture. And yes, positive emotions and positive psychology is relatively a new science. But positive emotion does more than just make us feel good, right? It helps us generate these new ideas. It helps us create. It helps us co-create, innovate, consider possibilities, expand our horizons, promote social networks, and really, least of which, happiness is contagious. So hang around with happy people, and you will catch their energy. And of course, the opposite is true as well. And I think my last reframe is improve yourself and not beat others. Up till a certain point of academia, academia itself is pegged to a standardized norm. So until a sense of academia, and maybe even sort of earlier careers, competitive advantage today takes a very different flavor than competitive advantage when we first learned it in school or in grad school, right? Today, when a company only looks at its own competitors as its edge, they're missing the ball. Kodak and Nokia are great examples of organizations that had sound financials, great talent. They were market leaders, but they only pegged themselves to other people in their industry. They no longer exist today. So at the very top, at the board level, at board diversity, when we look at what is our competitive advantage is really our people, our talent, and are we the best versions of ourselves as individuals? Self-actualization is, are you the best version of you and not a better version of your sister or your brother or your cousin or your neighbor, right? So of course, we do have to keep our eyes on a standardized norm, but really looking at it as your personal best. And I think just on cue, my last self-compassion check, and one that works the most for me is the one that I feel I have the most control over, is my breath, right? And I think no one says it better than Viktor Frankl in his beautiful book, which I think is a fantastic read for this time for everyone to read. And he says that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And that's it for me, Laura. And thank you all for participating, for listening. And I'm really happy. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to take some questions.
This has been truly amazing. I mean, there were a lot of questions, and also you were truly inspiring because you really gave us a perspective that is quite innovative and creative. The first question that came up is regarding self-awareness. You see, today, and that's the title of your story today, of your talk today. Self-awareness is what we were, many believe, before COVID, but COVID has created a moment of reflection, of introspection, and there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of unknowns that are coming up. How can you strengthen that self when everything has changed, and when the old normal might no longer be, and hopefully is not going to be existing? So we all have to reinvent ourselves. So what would you suggest to us that need to reinvent ourselves to do now in these moments of still some isolation and very soon openness?
It's a great question, Laura, and actually a very deep question. So I want to say that whether we actively pursue self-awareness or not, as animals and as humans, as part of the animals, we're gonna shed anyway. We're gonna shed, and every 10 years or so, we're a new version of ourselves anyway. So even if we don't actively pursue self-awareness, there is never that returning back, right? It's always an evolution. There's always a shedding. There's always a removing of the bits. Oh, I see myself much more clearly now. And I think COVID is really just a catalyzer. It's a fast track, right? So COVID is going to hastily fasten any trend or any progress or any evolution or any growth or any thought or any trend that we were already on. COVID is just going to solidify it, and it's going to reinforce it, or it's going to make you challenge it. So for me, I've been questioning a lot. 1/3 of my work ever since I started this practice was always in the pro bono space of women and women leadership, and looking at women from backgrounds where perhaps education wasn't even available to them. And how do I promote and sponsor and support these women? And before COVID, I was wondering, does the corporate MNC, multinational, board level work, does that still where I'm needed most? Is this where my greatest contribution will be? And I think post-COVID, I'm thinking, yes, that's what I know, and that's the playground I've navigated in the last 20 years. But really, for me, COVID is saying, no, my contribution to the world is going to take a different shape. It's going to take a different meaning. So it's not that my self-awareness has shifted, but those thoughts, those questions, those reflections I had. How do I pivot? What does the next stage of my life offer me? So this COVID crisis, that pause, COVID has been a pause for us to deeply reflect, introspect, affirm who we are, and sometimes for some of us who we're not.
Wow, very, very profound what you said. And there's a question that is very specific. In your today, in your personal routines, what have you adopted during COVID? What is it that you would recommend people? What is it that you now feel very passionate about? Let's say you get up and you start asking yourself, what will I do today? You go to sleep, you say, what did I think? I think that's also many very successful people like Ben Franklin always said, every time I go to sleep, I always dream of, I make a movie of my day. So tell us about your today routines, and how can you inspire us to be better?
Well, I want to start by saying I'm not the most routine loving person. I'm very organic. I am not a stickler of anything done daily or at the right time or the same time. So I'm the contrarian to people that say everything has the right time and the right place and you must do things every day. But generally, what I've done is make a habit of this reflection. And really, it stems from my knowledge when I switched from consultant to coach, right? Coaching believes that we set ourselves up for success. And really the whole self-efficacy, confidence, instilling confidence, retaining confidence, research tells us that we need to set ourselves up for small wins. And that means bite-sized steps. So what I used to do, which I think a lot of people do, is set myself really long and lofty goals. But I never broke them down. I never actually learned that the neuroplasticity of the brain means that I've got to take a small habit and a small step towards that change for 21 days in order to rewire the neuroplasticity. So if I've learned something and I consider it a bad habit or a maladaptive habit, can I replace it with a better habit? Absolutely. But it takes these small steps. And so what I've done is break my steps down and my goals down into such bite-sized pieces that even if I've just swallowed, or even if I've just done one thing, I still go, yay. And believe me, I talk to you as someone that is so hard and at one point was so hard on myself and so self-critical and so self-defeating that no matter what I did, I could never look at what I've accomplished. I was always looking at, oh, I didn't do this. And, look at this person. And, she stayed on her trajectory and I had to get off my treadmill, and I stopped working for 6 years because of my kids. And I had that self-talk for many years. And I think what's shifted is this question, right? That I asked myself, what did I learn today? Did I learn something new? And you guys are teaching me something today. So you're teaching me what I'm learning today. So you've done my ritual for me.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned self-talk. I mean, the infinite hundred, they say we have like 60,000 thoughts a day, and most of them are repetitive and negative. And you did mention how that's so important, but how can you really break the habit of self-talk and become more positive in your self-talk? Because I think that's one of the things, if somebody can crack that code, we will be better humans, because if everybody can have positive self-talk from the very beginning, how can we change that? What are your best tools to do that?
So I'm going to answer that with a mantra that I learned when I did my emotional intelligence and diversity training at UCLA. And this is when I was just switching careers from M&A and finance into this. And this was about 10 years ago. My mentor at the time, who heads the department, said to me, I didn't have the words for what I was going to do or what I wanted to do. And I took his course, which was really about finding this emotional intelligence and diversity. And his mantra, and I'll never forget it, was awareness precedes choice. If it's not in our awareness, we have no choice. We're not empowered to do anything about it. So to your question, Laura, or to whoever's wise question this is how do we shift or change or challenge, really is the question. How do we challenge our self-talk? Well, first we have to observe it. Observe it. And now here's where I intersect science and spirituality. Not only do you have to observe it, what gets measured gets done. You've got to count it. How many times a day do you talk yourself down? And here is the secret sauce. You've got to observe it. You've got to measure it in a non-judgmental way. So if you start counting and measuring, so if you worked with me and I was working with, this could be very senior women. Sometimes I'm working with board director level women who have this badgering all the time. And they tell me, well, it's just the way I grew up. It's the way my family spoke. It's what my parents used to say to me. Yes, of course, that's never going to go away. Your unconscious biases, your unconscious programming, every emotion you have ever felt will always lie in your unconscious. But the point of your unconscious is to bring your unconscious to your conscious, because once it's in your conscious, you're empowered to do something about it. If you're not aware, it will be in your blind spot forever, and it'll come out when you least expect it. And most of the time, that's when we're stressed, tired, meeting a deadline, and like now, in the midst of uncertainty and crisis and rioting. So watching, observing, and pausing without judgment, right? Oh, there it goes again. I just put myself down again. Oh, I just doubted myself. I was hesitant to go and ask for this from my boss. I was hesitant to set this boundary. Oh, I'm avoiding again. Watch it. Observe yourself speaking to yourself. Listen very intently to your self-talk. Most of us don't even hear it. It's so automatic. It's so sabotaging that it's just part of who we are.
Yes, at this point, there's a whole movement of people taking a course called Positive Intelligence, where they're talking about the sabotage, the judge. This is an amazing initiative. Have you had any experience with this very intricate and very methodology? And what are your thoughts about it?
Well, look, again, it follows that same, P, performance equals potential minus interference, right? So if we believe that our highest purpose to be put on this earth is to meet our fullest potential, or optimize our potential, to find our purpose, then that means I've got to know what my potential is. So I've also got to know what's holding me back. And I think the author of Positive Intelligence has also done some work with YPO, who, an organization that I'm deeply connected with, Laura, and that's how I met you, is he wrote our transformational forum tools. So I'm deeply connected to his work, and I did the course myself. I know my saboteurs. My saboteurs are to please. My saboteurs are to avoid. So I don't like saying no's, because how do pleasers say no? It was really hard for me to set boundaries, both personal and professional boundaries. I have clients and CEOs who call me up on a Sunday and say, I have a board meeting on Monday, and can you read 100 pages by tomorrow and give me a synopsis and ask me questions? And I say, oh, okay, right? And now I say, you know what, if I'm gonna work on a weekend, and I'm happy to, I need 48 hours, but I'll put aside an hour on a weekend and read your board minutes, and I'll write your questions for you. I've learned to be able to say, well, this works for me, this doesn't work for me, this serves me. But avoider and pleaser were my two biggest saboteurs that were holding me back from my fullest potential, from optimizing my potential. So I think it's a great model. But they all pretty much similarly say, where are you today? Where do you want to be? And what's in the way?
Excellent. So we have a few more minutes left, and I think that we would like to now close the call, in which, if you can give us some closing remarks of how you would what has been your best inspiration and tool in the last few months with all these changes. What do you think we're moving towards, and what do you think are the best suggestions you can give us?
Thank you, Laura. So I think one of my offerings in the last decade have been something that I call conscious culture change. And that's because I lie on the intersection of science and spirituality. I'm definitely a woman of science. I have 2 degrees in finance and marketing, and I do not have a sociology or liberal arts background, but intuitively, I'm a people person. I work on people strategy. I work on people dynamics, because I think no organization is any more than the people, and how we treat our people and how we're conscious of our people. But I think for me, culture has been such a big driver, not just national culture, as you saw with my opening, and the different countries and continents I've lived in, but organizational culture. The tone from the top has always been to set the culture. And this is a time for leaders. This is a time for leaders to walk their talk, to examine that the values that they have on their website align to the behaviors in their executive teams, in their boards. How do I see you walk your values? And when I do a cultural audit, when I talk about conscious culture change, the one tool that has helped me understand and infuse consciousness into my corporate training, coaching, strategy, advisory work is my practice. It's my own meditation and spiritual practice. It's not religious, perhaps, even though I am Hindu. It's not a religious practice. It's more really self-awareness practice. It's sitting, it's still with nature. I found, COVID and the rat race and the treadmill, I found the sitting still incredibly cathartic, and reflective. Of course there was angst, of course there was worries, of course there was doubt, of course there were work and contracts and family and parents to consider, and all the hardship and the strife that you saw on the news. But I think it was also a time, and it's a time for the entire globe, especially those of you who are in power, to effect change. My closing words is to make conscious culture change, because under culture really comes all of our issues. It comes our issues of gender, it comes our issue of generation, and looking at differences we can't leverage differences until we surface them, and we can't surface them until we can talk about them without everything being a politically sensitive issue. We've made culture into a politically sensitive and delicate issue, but actually, if we keep saying we're colorblind, we're going to keep running red lights, as we're seeing all around us. So my words are really conscious culture change, and let's impact this change together.
Wonderful. I mean, it's been really inspiring talk, and I think that everybody in this line will, and in Facebook Live has so much new tools now, because we are humans and we tend to forget things that matter. We keep hearing things that are so interesting, but are you acting on it? So I asked you to take a pen, a piece of paper, and write down right now, while I keep talking, what are the 3 things that you will actually do? What are you going to change? What did you really hear that were so inspiring that today you will actually make a phone call, you will send an SMS, you will actually re-listen to this webinar that will be on our website? What is it that you're going to do to change? Because we hear lots of inspirations, but do you really change? Do we keep being the same old, same old? No, we need to change. And there's only one way to change, is to take action today when you hear something inspiring. So we, during COVID, we've had a lot of practically daily webinars, all either in Spanish, English, Italian, or Portuguese, because we want to have people connect with their heart. Whenever you hear something talked in your own language, you actually create that switch, and maybe you really do the change. So the next webinars will be about AI and about the influence of a fake and truthful media. I think this is a very important subject today. And biomimesis, we're going to also talk about meditation. One of the Suzanne Hill is a master meditator, a trainer for over 40 years. And so she's going to give us a talk. Also, we'll have a talk about purposehood. That is a new book that just came out by Amar Sharan. And it's all about how can you create your real objective purpose. We'll have a talk about non-flick, the art of everyday peacemaking, about sustainable fashion. What is sustainable fashion? So on that note, I would like to thank everybody for joining us, especially Gulnar. This has been truly amazing. Thank you, thank you. And I hope all of you by now have written your 3 things that you really will say, yes, I was a whole hour listening. I might as well change these 3 things that were so inspiring. Okay, so on this note, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you very soon on our next webinars. Thank you very much.
Laura. Thank you.